Good evening. Welcome to Aldersgate United Methodist Church. We're glad to have you with us tonight. We also welcome not only people in the audience live, but we also welcome people who are viewing us online. I'm Carrie Beckenhauer. I'm a member of the Lasting Legacy team, and I want to welcome everybody tonight. I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. The first is that to find the restrooms, you go out the double doors you just came in, turn left and go down the hallway. You'll see the water fountain and you'll know you're in the right place. The other thing is that we have emergency exits on every wall in the sanctuary. Not expecting to use them, but find the one that's closest to you. There is a handout that you should have picked up when you came in. Got 5 or 6 pages there that you can take home and read, take home with you. This is the 4th presentation in our life and legacy planning. We're so glad that you're with us. The plan tonight is the speaker will talk for about 30 minutes, then we're going to take a 5-minute break. So you can go over and get some coffee. We make decaf when we meet in the evening like this, so go over and get some coffee or pick up a cookie. Then we'll come back and the speaker will talk for another 30 minutes. The speaker tonight does not really have a presentation. Really here to answer questions that you might have. So we're going to come around with the wireless mic. It's important to speak your question into the microphone because people online, that's the only way they can hear it. So I'm going to introduce Del Lineman Jr. Del is a retired CPA. He was a CPA over 50 years, not only doing tax work, but of course working with businesses. And now his last name is Lineman. But in this church we also have some Linemans. And it's spelled the same way, but 2 different branches of the family. So with that, we're going to open it up to the floor. Del's going to talk probably a little bit more about his background, different foundations that he helps, he serves on, and so on and so forth. So let's welcome Del.
My father started our accounting firm in 1945. I started working for it in July of 1972. I took over the firm in 1983 as the majority partner and been practicing since then until January 1, 2024, when I sold the accounting firm to another CPA. Our firm specialized in accounting for small businesses. We did computer services for small businesses, their payroll checks, accounts receivable, accounts payable. Of course, we did individual and business tax returns. We also did a lot of estate planning, along with the attorneys that were involved in the process. I'm going to run through, I wrote them down, there's a lot of them. I want to run through the tax returns that I filed basically every year. And while you're trying to deal with Form 1040, I had to deal with all these. And I had to know all the rules. So I filed Form 1040, which is for individuals. I filed Form 1041, which is for estates and trusts. I filed Form 1065, which is for partnerships. I filed Form 1120, which is for C corporations. I filed Form 1120S, which is for S corporations. Somebody has a question, I explain the difference. I worked with attorneys to file Form 706 on estates. I filed gift tax returns whenever one of my clients wanted to make a gift that would exceed the annual gift allowance. And then I filed 990s for the nonprofit organizations like a church, other organizations like that. And I also filed 990PF, which is for private foundations that are nonprofit. I currently am on the board of the Ethel S. Abbott Charitable Foundation, and we have roughly $35 million in assets, and we give away about $1.5 million a year. I am also the foundation manager and run the Lineman Charitable Foundation. We have roughly $30 million, and we give away about $1.25 million a year. So pretty familiar with nonprofits and private foundations. I'm going to do a PSA announcement for the IRS. You have 2 weeks left to do your tax return. And We can also discuss tonight, if you have questions about the economy, tariffs, things like that. We'll be glad to go over those things as well, because that's pretty much in the news right now, and everybody's kind of concerned about that. So I have some general information about that, if you have questions. I wanted to start with the 1913 tax code. Now, you've got it on your handout. This is the first page. And the 1913 was when the tax code came in. So we're going to go back to where we started. And an interesting factoid, the federal government financed its operations prior to this with tariffs. Tariffs is how they raised the money to run the government. So apparently we're going back to the future, and we're going to do that again. And if you look at the actual tax return itself, the tax rate, it was a one-page form. This is it. This is the entire tax return for 1913. And the taxable income it was calculated on was 20 per thousand or less. The tax rate was 1%. Okay? And if you look at that front page, in 1913, they raised $35 million with 1%. Plus, a few people paid the overage. Now, if you ran that for inflation, it'd probably be 100, 120,000, even more for today. So the tax rate on that would have been 1%, given where we are today with the current brackets that we have. So I thought that you might get a kick out of seeing where we started, because where we are now is a long ways away from our one-page form where we started. All right, with that, I think I'll open it up for questions. Anybody have one? Oh, before I do that, I'm going to give you an idea of how you find a good accountant. Okay? So a CEO of a corporation interviewed 3 accounting firms, and he asked them the same question. What's 2 plus 2? The first accounting firm came out and said, well, it was 4. And he goes, well, that's pretty good. That's right. Second accounting firm said it was 5. No, I don't think you're not going to cut it. Third accounting firm said, what number did you have in mind? That's your accountant. You tell me what you want it to be and I'll make it happen. All right.
Let's start tonight.
This is a question. It brought me up. I had a neighbor, she would be 125 now, and she said the first time she applied for tax, she did it on a 3x5 card, and that was it.
Well, this was the actual form, and the only thing I can think of is that she may have filed what they used to call the short form, and it could have been that the first versions of that were on a postcard or something like that. But the actual 1040 has always been a one-page form until Trump changed it. And if you'll notice that when Trump came in, he wanted it to be a very short thing like that. So if you remember his first year he was in office, the front of the 1040 was only this big. Well, all they did was just make it multiple pages because he wanted the first page to be short. So they did make the first page short and just moved everything to pages 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, but it's been usually a full page form. And the other thing that I probably should mention is that when I started practicing in 1972, we were operating under the 1954 tax code. The Tax Reform Act of '86 fundamentally changed the way we tax income. And so now we are operating under the 1986 tax code today. And so that's something that happened during the time I was practicing. A lot of CPAs retired when they changed the rules, because it was a massive change in the way income and things were going to be accounted for. And so a lot of CPAs that were nearing retirement just said, forget it, I'm not going to learn all those new rules, and they retired. And there were a lot of rules.
I have a small question having to do with charitable giving from required minimum distributions from retirement funds. Is this loud enough for you? Are you happy? Okay.
She's got a slide for it. It'll show up eventually.
Okay, so my question is, we give a number of small donations, and I'm talking about $50, $100, something like that. Do the charitable organizations, and in my case, I'm thinking about distributions from a fund at an IRA at Vanguard, are they willing to do things for small amounts like that, or do you need to be giving a large amount of money for them to be willing to give it as a direct charitable contribution? I'm probably using the wrong words, but you know what I mean, don't you?
I know what you mean.
Thank you.
I think you'd have to check with the entity that has your IRA.
So
To see
in my
what
case, it would be
if
Vanguard.
they have a minimum amount that you would have to distribute.
Okay,
But if they don't have a minimum, you can do any number you want. The check has to go to the charity directly. And then the other thing is it has to be a regular not-for-profit. My private foundations that I work for do not qualify for RMDs. You cannot make them to them.
What do you mean when you say a regular not-for-profit?
It'd be like the Red Cross, things like that. They're operating foundations. So a nonprofit organization that's an operating foundation or an operating charity is what you can contribute to. A private foundation is held by a family generally, and so then you can't make an RMD to that entity.
How would I know the difference?
You'd have to ask them
I see.
what they are. You can also get a copy of their 501c3 letter from the IRS that tells you whether they're a charity or not, and they're under 501c3.
Okay. So just being a 501(c) is not enough to distinguish you?
They have to be basically an operating entity.
Okay.
And the real difference is that as a private foundation, we can only give our money to other nonprofits. So I can only give my money to the Red Cross.
Oh, I see.
I can't give it to an individual. The Red Cross can give it to people. And so that's the major difference.
So the Lincoln Community Foundation, for example?
A community foundation would be an operating foundation.
That is not.
Like the Lincoln Foundation? Yes, you can put money in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you discuss the difference between this transfer on death versus trust? Is there any significant difference between the two as far as taxes?
Yeah, there is. A transfer on death is generally something that you put on the document, like a deed or a bank account or something like that, and it automatically passes without going through your estate, which is the main advantage in that. So it doesn't get picked up in your estate. Now, we used, when I first started, the estate limit was $60,000. If your estate was over $60,000, you paid tax. It's now $13 million. So it's unlikely that anybody here, including me, is ever going to have to pay an estate tax because we just don't have that kind of income. And the advantage in using a trust is that it enables you to control the money after you're gone. That's what a trust will do. So if you put in there who your beneficiaries are, when they get the money, how much they get, whether it goes to a charity, whether it goes to your family members, all of that's in the trust. And that's probably the major difference between, because on death, it's just going to move right to whoever gets it.
Do they both avoid tax?
Well,
Do they both avoid probate?
If you set up the trust correctly, and this is a mistake that a lot of people make. I have a trust. So when you set up the trust, you have to put things into the name of the trust. And I had a client who came in with his wife, and he had a trust, but he had not put anything in the name of the trust. And she was beating him over the head with her purse, saying, you got to change it, you got to change it. And because the trust was absolutely worthless if he didn't put anything in the name of the trust. So he had lots of stocks and stuff like that, so he had to go back and retitle all the stocks into the name of the trust so that they flowed into the trust at death. Otherwise, they would have gone outside of the trust because it was not labeled properly.
So like your house, you need to put your house inside.
Yes. Like in my trust, my house is titled in the name of the trust. So it's already in the trust, which avoids going through probate because it's not outside of the trust. It's already in the trust. And my trust is revocable. Most trusts are revocable.
When you're speaking about a trust and the beneficiaries, why could not a trust be the beneficiary of a whatever, of say stocks, an investment account? If they're their first beneficiary, would they not be able to continue the same thing as if they were named the trust?
So you're wanting to put stocks and other investments inside the trust, is that what I get?
No, outside.
Outside of the trust.
And then the beneficiary is the trust.
Well, a stock, the stock doesn't work that way because there's no beneficiary on a stock certificate.
Investment account.
Huh?
An investment account.
An investment account is different.
Yes.
Yeah, if you have an investment account, the account can have the trust as a beneficiary. Okay? Now, you have to be careful if you do an IRA to the trust. And I've got that situation where I'm dumping my regular IRA into my trust. The problem is that a trust hits the 39% bracket at $13,000. So you don't want to be taxed in the trust. So you can set it up. The Secure Act allowed you to flow through the trust to the beneficiaries directly, so it goes onto their tax return. So my IRA, the trust is the beneficiary, but it flows through the trust and out to my kids, and they get the money, and they don't have to pay tax at that high rate. They get to put it on their personal return and whatever bracket they're in. Any other questions?
Yeah. Then would it be necessary to have a trust? Would it be necessary then to have a trust if you just already have your IRAs, whatever you're talking about there, and your children named as beneficiaries?
No, not if you don't want them to get the money all at once. Now, one of the things that we did a lot of estate planning for wealthier taxpayers as a CPA, and one of the things they don't want their kids to get is all the money at once.
Right.
That's the problem. So if your kids are the beneficiaries of the IRA, they get it all at once or over a 10-year period.
So the trust can control the amounts?
Well, if not on the IRA, unless you want to pay tax at that high rate, at the high rate. And the only way you can control it is to have a regular investment account, which is not in an IRA, or a Roth IRA, which has no required minimum distribution or no distribution requirement. They can flow into the trust and be held by the trust and doled out over a period of time. But the advantage in the trust is that you can control how that money is sprinkled out when it goes out. A lot of the people that we made up estate plans for would use 50, 55, 60, 65 as the trigger dates for their kids to get the money. So before they get there, the trust can give them money if they need it for medical or whatever purpose, to buy a house or whatever they wanted it for. But they wouldn't get dumped out the bigger pot of money until they were old enough to maybe know how to do it and how to use it. And so what you don't want is a 25-year-old getting $1 million. You know, it won't be there long.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for Chip?
So what about the tax impact for TODs versus trust? Is there some way to adjust either one to lower the tax the kids would have to pay?
Well, if it's something that's taxed at death, it's going to go into the estate. And again, the estate tax is so high now, you're not going to pay federal estate tax. There is no Nebraska estate tax, but there is Nebraska inheritance tax. And so then you will have to pay that on monies that are inherited.
Is it income tax rate
No, there is a separate tax rate for inheritance tax. It's a completely separate taxing system. That's the one the legislature is dealing with now, trying to figure out whether they want to get rid of it. Because I think there's only 5 or 6 states left, and Nebraska's one, that has an inheritance tax. All the other states have gotten rid of them.
Next question.
On a normal
IRA, an inherited IRA has to be, if I understand correctly, taken out over a 10-year period. Is there an accounting technique that can, or way to adjust that so it doesn't have to be taken out over that 10-year period?
The rule is that the money has to be gone at the end of the 10th year. It can be distributed any way you want during the 10-year period, but at the end of 10 years, it has to be gone. The previous rule was much better, where you would have it spread out over the beneficiary's life. So the person was 25 and they inherited it, they could spread it out, and it would be divided out over 50, 60 years. Instead, now it's compressed into 10 years because the government realized they were losing too much money by letting it go out so far.
Okay, so presently, there's no way to avoid
There's
that.
no way to avoid the 10-year requirement. You have to take it out. The only one that you can avoid it on is to put it in a Roth. So you could take the money out of your traditional IRA and put it in a Roth. As long as you can afford to pay the tax, you can do that. And we had a lot of people that would do that, where they would look at their, if you could stay in the first two tax brackets, they're pretty good. And so then if you can stay in those tax brackets and say you've got 25 or 30,000 left before you hit the top of the bracket, and we did this a lot in our planning with clients, is that then we would then make them do a Roth conversion to pick up that other $25,000 and say, okay, let's shove it in there because there's no RMD on that. And they were still paying tax at 12%, so it wasn't too bad.
So the Nebraska inheritance tax, does that apply? My nephews live in Illinois, so if something happens to me tomorrow, do they get the tax, even though they're out of state?
The inheritance tax, as it's currently structured, again, I don't do this. The attorneys file the inheritance tax. I don't file them. You notice that wasn't on my list of things I file. Inheritance tax is generally filed by the attorney handling the estate. The inheritance tax is at a low rate. I think it's 1% for relatives that are immediate family. If you give it to a non-relative, then it gets much higher. I don't know, 15, 20%, something like that. They pay a much higher rate. So it doesn't make any difference where they're living. It makes a difference on whether they're a family member or not. That's what counts.
With regard to the taxability of to the beneficiary of IRAs, does that apply also if the wife, the spouse, is the beneficiary?
No.
I think that's something that people don't understand.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you have your spouse as the beneficiary of your IRA, the money goes directly to the spouse and can be put into her IRA, and they can be combined together. Then the problem comes when that person dies, and then it has to come out over the 10-year period.
Right.
And it could be a much bigger number if you combined it together. So some people will not have it roll over to the spouse because it makes the number too big, and then they'll do something else with it. But the most tax efficient way is to have the spouse be the beneficiary, because then there's no tax, it just rolls right over.
With regard to dividends, we have dividends and we have qualified dividends, and I've never figured out what that really means. Could you speak to that just for a moment?
Sure. Dividends, it used to be taxed as ordinary income. And so that was one of the reasons that S corporations got formed. Remember I told you there were C and S. C is a regular corporation, S is a pass-through corporation, where everything passes through it to the stockholders. And so a C corporation, the only way you could get the money out was to pay a dividend. Well, that dividend was ordinary income. So most people weren't too thrilled about that. And when they changed the law, I think maybe it was Trump or maybe a little earlier, but when they changed the law, they set up a qualified dividends as having a lower rate. And so a qualified dividend is generally described as a domestic corporation. So if you have a dividend from General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, a U.S. company, that dividend is going to be eligible for the lower rate. And so that makes it very attractive. And of course, most of these corporations that were C corporations can now pay a dividend that's subject to the lower rate because they are domestic corporations.
Speaking of the qualified dividends, is this on?
Yeah.
My understanding is that they are taxed at 0% if your taxable income as a couple, for instance, is about $97,000. Is that correct?
It's in the handout. If you look at the handout, the marginal rates are on the first page of this one. The 0% rate applies to the 10 and 12% brackets. Okay? So you'll hit the 22% bracket at 48,000 or 96,950 for a married couple. So as long as it's under 96,950, the tax is 0.
So somebody that owns this stock that does nothing, doesn't go to work, they get 0% tax.
If they can keep their income under 96, yes.
Okay.
From all sources, that's all your income together.
And then I was looking at a Motley Fool deal on the internet that indicated that if you bought Berkshire Hathaway in like 1965 and put $1,000 in that stock in 1965, today the stock would be worth $42.5 million. And how much would that person have paid on that increased value of stock?
Nothing.
Okay, and
Because
then
the tax only occurs at the sale of the stock, not as it rises in value. This is the main reason people invest in the stock market, is because the stocks increase in value, so they get wealth, but don't pay any tax on it until they get rid of it.
yes, and then the capital gain rate is like the qualified dividend rate, where you could sell some of that stock every year, say sell more of it than a person would earn in a year, and as long as you didn't have more than $96,000 of taxable income as a couple, you'd pay 0% capital gains. And then if you die, you can pass on 13.5 million, was it?
Something like that, yeah.
Estate tax free. And your heirs get a step-up basis. So they could turn around the very next day and sell that stock and pay 0 on those, what was it, $13.5 million of earnings on Berkshire stock.
You have just hit on why we do estate planning. That's the reason we do estate planning, for that exact purpose. We're trying to hit and get as much deferred income as we can into a capital asset
And you
that
see
gets an
that
increase in
as
value
a
at
good
death.
thing. That's a good thing.
It is very good.
Now that person that bought Berkshire Hathaway, they didn't do anything. They haven't made anything. They haven't helped anyone, theoretically. They haven't made a product. They
Well,
haven't
they let
created any
Warren do the
ideas.
work.
What?
They let Warren Buffett do the work. They bought his stock so he'd have the money to work with.
And a lot of times when we're buying stock, we're not, say in 65, maybe that money was actually going to Warren Buffett. But let's say I bought it in 2000, say, year 2000. But I didn't put that money in Berkshire Hathaway. I bought that stock from somebody that bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody else way back when.
Sure.
So that money didn't even go to Berkshire Hathaway.
No, only the original issuance or subsequent issues by the company itself would have gone to the
So
company.
why the blank do we favor that kind of income over earned income, over the guy that has to work for a living?
Tax Reform Act of 1986. Remember I told you it changed the way things are taxed?
But why don't we do something about this? This is wrong.
Well, because the people who have the money and lobby Congress really like that deal.
But we're the people. We're supposed
That's
to
the
change
problem.
things. Why do we feel so powerless?
The thing is, you have to take advantage of the system you got. And so if the system says that's a good deal, then you should be taking advantage of it. And you should be doing the things you can to generate the same kind of income that the wealthier taxpayers are doing to eat up that same benefit.
And the poor schmuck that does work and that looks out at this kid that never worked a day in his life out sunning on his yacht, he's supposed to feel good about this system that wouldn't let him get $1,000.
I wouldn't say he probably feels good about it, but it's the rules we got. You play by the
But
rules you got.
let's change the rules.
If you want to change your rules, you got to go to Congress because they're the ones that pass the law.
Well,
We can't do much about it.
you feel powerless too, a CPA.
What's that?
You feel powerless too.
Right, I can't do anything about it. I have to follow the law, and the law is written by Congress, and we have to follow the rules that are in existence at the time that we're filing the tax return. The rules have changed over the years, and I have to keep adjusting every year to all the new rules.
Let's have a poll. How many thinks this is a good system?
It depends on whether you have capital assets. It's a good system if you do.
What was the taxable rate for Berkshire Hathaway, and how many millions of dollars did they pay?
I have no idea, but I know that he pays a lot of tax. And I don't know what his effective tax rate is, but he pays a lot of tax. And he doesn't mind paying tax. If you remember, Warren's been quoted as saying, if I'm paying taxes, I'm doing something right. In other words, he's making money. And so if he's making money, he's going to pay taxes. So he doesn't mind paying taxes as long as he's got the money to pay them with. It's when you have to pay taxes, you don't have any money, that's a problem.
Okay, Chip's been in front of us for about 30 minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Stand up, stretch your legs, go over, get some coffee, pick up a cookie, use the restrooms, whatever. We'll resume in 5 minutes.
And when we come back, I'll give you a true story about what not to do with your tax return. Yeah. That's not taking the money out. Annuity is just an investment. You can buy a stock, buy a bond, you can buy annuity. The annuity.
It's still based.
But you would have to take some of that out. Doesn't have to take some.
But would the tax amount count towards our RMD? What I mean is, if they're paying $1,000 a month, is that going to count towards the RMD? So $1,000 take it down to $2,000 a year, and that's different to our RMD than our RMD. Go like, thank you.
Time to regather here. Okay, we need to move forward, folks, and I'll be coming around with the microphone for whoever has the next question, so give Chip a chance to answer questions you might have.
Well, I got to give my story first. All right. Now, this is a true story, and this is why you go to a CPA. All right, I had a client who had a house on a lake, and it was a kind of a summer home, and he wanted to give it to he wanted to stay in the family, so he sold it to his son, and sold it for, $100,000 or something like that, whatever it was worth. And then he had a very low basis on it because he had built it himself. So he had a massive capital gain, which was one of those things that's now favorably taxed. But he had a big capital gain. He also had an investment account, and he wanted to give $25,000 each to his two kids. So he cashed in his, pulled the money out of his IRA, or well, it was his investment account. It wasn't an IRA, it was an investment account. So he pulled out of his IRA, or investment account, this $25,000 and gave it to each one of his kids. So unfortunately, he did all that without asking me. And so then he comes in to do his tax return. He had been living basically on his Social Security and the earnings off this investment account. He had a pension that was also paying him some money. And so in general, when we added up all of his income, he paid very little tax. Okay? So now what he had done is he sold off this property, had this massive capital gain, and he had this money he took out of his investment account to pay to his kids, so he had another chunk of income from that. So what ended up happening is he was paying almost nothing on his Social Security. So what happened? 85% became taxable because he drew all this income out. And he ended up paying like $15,000 worth of taxes that year when he'd been paying zero. Now, if he'd have come in and talked to me, guess what we would have done? First off, instead of selling, we would sold it to his kid, just like he did, but we would have sold it on a note, not for cash. Because his son had to go out and borrow the money to pay his dad for the house. So we would have had a loan to the kid. The annual gift limit was at that time $17,000 for him and his wife. So $100,000, he could have given $34,000 of it away by forgiving the debt. And would have paid nothing, paid no tax. Except, because he would have sold it on a contract and it would have been done over a period of time. The gain would have been recognized, but over a period of years, and we could have stretched it out 10 years if we wanted to. So that income would have been picked up in small pieces as we forgave the debt and kept him under the threshold where he had to pay all his tax on his Social Security. Same thing with the investment account. What did he do wrong? He sold the assets and paid cash. What should he have done? Should have given him the shares of the investment account. So it was invested in, say, a mutual fund. All he has to do is give him the shares of the mutual fund. When you give a gift to somebody, the basis that you have carries over. So the gain would have shifted from him to his kids. And then they would only recognize it when they sold the shares. So they could sell the shares in little teeny pieces and keep their taxes down as well. And he would have owed zero tax that year and done everything he wanted to do. But he didn't call me until after he had done it.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
My question is, do you as a CPA then charge like an hourly rate for people to come and ask you these questions? Because that's not a doing your taxes question. That's a consulting question that's separate from doing your taxes.
Yeah, we bill on an hourly rate. My hourly rate, was $200 an hour at the end, but when I first started, it was probably $30 an hour. So it depends on your years of experience. I had 50 years of experience, which is how I got a $200 hourly rate. But yes, he would have made an appointment, he would have come in, we would have discussed what he wanted to do, and then we would have devised a plan to do it with the most tax efficient way we could. Instead, he did it first and then asked questions later. And not a good idea. That's not the way to do it. All right, questions?
Who has another question for Chip?
In your introduction, you referred to or alluded to the tariffs and those types of things. Would that be something you'd like to open up with like right now, just to give you a general concept of what you're thinking?
Well, we can certainly talk about tariffs and what's going on. I will tell you that there is massive uncertainty, and the one thing that people don't like and businesses don't like is uncertainty. And so businesses are not spending money. They have all stopped. My son works for the Bureau of Reclamation in Denver, and he's afraid he's going to lose his job. And he's a supervisor, so he's already had to let 14 people go because they told him he had to fire 14 people, but he's afraid he might be next. So what did he do? He's quit spending money on anything that he doesn't have to. It's all going in the bank. And he's not the only one. Every person who's a federal employee is putting their money in the bank because they don't know if they're next. Also, they're cutting off all these contracts to independent contractors who work for the government in all these agencies. And then they're laying off their people because they lost their contract. So you've got all these layoffs that are going to be coming down the line as they keep cutting more and more contracts. So you're going to have a lot of people scared that they could lose their job. When you're scared, you put it in the bank for the rainy day because you don't know when the rainy day is going to show up. But that has a disastrous effect on the economy because consumers are 70% of the economy. So if we're all putting it in the bank, nobody's spending it. So if nobody's spending it, the economy's going to go down. Now, tomorrow, Trump's going to announce all of his tariffs. And he's already put tariffs on steel and aluminum. But tomorrow, probably he will announce that the tariffs on cars are coming back. 25% tariff. I saw a story that they did when he first announced it the first time. They talked to a car dealer and he said that I forget which pickup it was. I think it was a General Motors pickup that's made in Mexico. And it's a $60,000 pickup. He said the next day after the tariffs, it's an $80,000 pickup. Going to go up $20,000 in one day. And he said, I'm not going to sell any of those. He said, nobody's going to pay that extra $20,000. So then what's going to happen to the businesses with all the tariffs? Their business is going to drop. And so if these tariffs stay in for an extended period, it's a guarantee that you're going to have a recession, because all the economic activity is collapsing because of it. And you've already seen that in some of the statistics that have come out. The consumer confidence is plunging. Their confidence is plunging because they can see the handwriting on the wall that everybody is cutting back because nobody knows what's going to happen. And Trump's main purpose for doing these tariffs, he keeps saying, is to stimulate the production in the United States. Well, how long does it take to build a car factory in the United States? 4 or 5 years. So how's that possible to fix it? Plus, you got to remember, the free trade agreement we had with Canada and Mexico was done on purpose. And Trump even redid it in his first term. And now he's blowing it up. But the idea was that there would be free and access trade back and forth between the countries. So that's why you see on cars, parts are made in Mexico and Canada. And they've talked about this on TV, but the parts come in and part of it's assembled here, then it goes back to Canada and gets assembled, then it comes back to the United States. Some of the parts come from Mexico, some of them comes here, then they go back to Mexico. Some of these parts are going back and forth 2 or 3 times across the border, but that's because we designed it that way. This free trade agreement, that was the whole purpose of it, was that basically we were one big operation. All 3 countries worked together. And so now he wants to say, oh no, you have to build it in the United States. Great, but it's going to take 4 or 5 years to do that. And so that's going to really push back the benefits of what he's trying to do. And in the meantime, we're paying 25% more for a car.
My daughter works for the CFPB, and she's been busy doing nothing for the last 6 or 7 weeks because the first week they took over, they told everybody, quit working.
Mm-hmm.
So she's drawing her salary but not doing any work, so that's real efficient, right?
Oh, yeah. It's a Consumer Protection Agency.
Yeah. Consumer Finance Protection Bureau.
Yeah.
And they got after Wells Fargo for opening all those bad accounts 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, very important agency and saves us a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they're going to get rid of it because, why are they going to get rid of it?
Well, they didn't say why.
They know, you know why.
Well, yeah, it's political.
It's political, and the people who make the money are the people who are cheating. So the companies and the banks that were ripping us off can now do it again because they just got rid of the agency that stopped them from doing it, which is why they killed that agency.
Yeah.
Just like they're rolling back the EPA rules. So you're going to see more pollution because they cut back all those rules. So the idea is that they're helping these businesses lower their costs and increase their profits. And that's the problem. The watchdog agencies, they killed almost all the inspector generals. They fired almost all of them right away. And those were the guys that were watching what was going on. Well, you don't want anybody watching if you're going to bend the rules a little, so you got to get rid of them. You got to get rid of them. So that's been the whole process, but we're getting screwed. Now, whether you realize it or not, we're getting screwed. And we're the ones that are going to be getting screwed through this whole process, because the only people who are going to benefit are the high-income taxpayers like Elon Musk, who's got so much money, doesn't know what to do with it all. But we're all going to be paying huge amounts of penalties for all these tariffs, all the lost jobs, all of that is just going to be on the average American. Is just going to get killed in this deal.
Yeah, but our 5 Nebraska representatives to Congress don't seem that concerned.
No, but they also don't want to have too many town halls either, because we would all show up and tell them what we think of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want to be out there taking questions, that's for sure.
You appear to be fairly close to the charitable giving side of things and working with foundations and so on. In your scenario that you've painted about people keeping money in their pocket or in the bank, what's that going to do to the charitable community, in your opinion? And do you think that there's going to still be generosity for us, this church, other churches, and other charitable reasons to give?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I don't think that we have a lot of good ideas yet what's going to happen. But I do think that a lot of charities, especially churches, will probably be okay because people give to churches because they believe in what the church is doing, not whether it's, helping the community as much. They believe in the church's mission, so that's why they give the money. The agencies, I think, that are going to really suffer are food banks, places like that, where people just aren't going to have the resources to give them anything anymore. And then they're going to have a real problem. And the number of people going to food banks is skyrocketing because of all these problems. So everybody's making less money, can afford less food. They're talking about killing SNAP, which is the program that helps all these low-income kids and everything. If they start killing all that stuff, it's a big problem. Now, you have to realize, they're coming after Social Security and Medicare. Don't kid yourself. They're coming after it. Congress already passed the blueprint for the budget. That blueprint requires $880 billion to be cut out of the agency that does Medicare and Medicaid. Okay? The agency only has $560 billion of its entire budget that's not Medicaid and Medicare. So if they have to cut $880 billion and there's only $500 and some billion that isn't Medicare, where does the rest of it come from? Medicare. So they already said how much they want to cut, but they don't have enough money in there to cut it from everything else. And then in Social Security, you've already seen them. They've started to attack it from the other side. Instead of actually cutting the benefits, they're cutting the people that work there. And they're laying them off. So what do you think the odds are of being able to find somebody? And they've already said that, in most cases now, you're starting, I think, today, you can't call in, talk to Social Security. You have to physically go to the office. So they're making it more difficult for you to be able to talk to your government and get a benefit. So it's just, they're just attacking it from different angles. But all of these things are bad for all of us.
So with Social Security, as people are getting closer, do you suggest taking it as early as you can, or waiting till, whether you can take it, 62 and a half is the first time you can take it, versus wait until 67 to get your full benefit?
That's a real tough question. Because you get a tremendous benefit by waiting. You get 8% a year. So most people now are having to take it at 67 maybe, something like that, 66, 67. But if you wait till 70, you get an 8% additional benefit each year. And then it'll take you a while to recover that, so you have to live past 70. So you have to look at your family history to say, okay, like my dad died at 98. So I'm saying, okay, I think I can live past 70 a while based on my family history. But if my parents were dying at 75, maybe I wouldn't want to wait. Then if you do go at 62 and don't go at your full retirement age, you take a permanent hit of around 25 to 30% of your benefit. You don't get it forever. The only way to get it back is to pay all the money back before you retire at your retirement age, and then you can, who's got the money left after you've already spent it. So it's a real tough decision. We also are facing the end of the line on Social Security Trust Fund. And they're already talking about benefits having to go down 25, 30% when they run out of money.
There's an easy solution to that.
There is an easy solution to that.
Just raise the income on which people pay a Social Security.
Right. The obvious fix is right now, Medicare is unlimited. So if you're a CEO who makes $300 million, you pay Medicare, the Medicare tax goes up on $300 million. Social Security stops at $125,000. So the $120,000 to $300 million, you don't pay anything. There's a lot of Social Security money there. So they need to do what she just said. They need to pull that cap off and make those CEOs and all those multimillionaires pay that tax. Now, you know what they'll do? they'll take it in stock options instead of salary, which will reduce their salary subject to the Medicare. But the principle is right. You should pull that off because you'll collect a lot more money. So that's one easy way to generate more revenue, and you're only getting it from the top 1 to 5% of the population because they're the ones that aren't paying it now. So that's a good idea. And, but of course, who contributes to the political campaign? It's the top 1 to 5%, and so then, of course, they aren't going to pass anything they don't like, especially Trump, because that's the group he really likes. And so that's why all his policies seem to be steered towards helping the upper echelon and the big corporations make more money. So, but that is a good idea, and they should do it. Whether they will or not, I don't know.
The current tax structure was enacted under the first Trump administration, and it's due to end in 2025. So what's your perspective on tax planning beyond 2025?
Well, that's a good question, too. I think that he wants to renew it. He's already said that. The big problem they have is that is a budget buster. You know, it just kills the budget if they do that. Part of the reason he's after the tariffs is to replace the money that he's going to lose if he passes his tax cut. See, in his mind, he's going to generate trillions of dollars in tariff revenue to offset his trillions of dollars in tax cuts that he wants to give out. Those tax cuts primarily benefit, again, the wealthy. They're the ones that really save the money the first time around. There was a small benefit for the rest of us. They made the single and married brackets equal up to about $35,000, and then they doubled the standard deduction, which helped a lot of people, and of course took away the charitable contribution deduction, which I think has hurt some organizations because you can't, if you take the standard deduction, the charitable contribution doesn't do any good. And they're talking about trying to bring back, they float so many ideas, it's hard to keep them all straight, but they're talking about trying to bring back, again, a charitable deduction you can take without itemizing to help put back in some charitable giving. But the problem they've got is their numbers are just so bad. It's just terrible. And I don't know how they're going to be able to pass the budget without blowing a hole in the deficit. And of course, the problem with the deficit is that it theoretically doesn't matter. That's the problem. Because as long as we're the world's reserve currency, we're fine. As soon as we aren't, we're dead. So the problem is, at some point, as they keep screwing around with this and keeping that deficit getting up and up and up, we won't be the reserve currency anymore. China will. Somebody else will become the reserve currency. And because we're the reserve currency, everybody has to work in dollars, which is our benefit. We've been living the high life here for 50, 60 years, basically because we're the world's reserve currency. We lose that, we're in real trouble. Because then, if China's the reserve currency, everything in the United States gets repriced to the Chinese currency. And that's not going to be good for us. So we have to be careful about how that deficit gets there. And also, the government has to issue paper. It has to issue treasury notes, treasury bills, to be able to fund the government. And of course, if you increase the deficit by trillions and trillions of dollars, you've got to issue trillions and trillions of dollars worth of bonds and notes. Who's going to buy them? One of the biggest partners we have is China. They've been buying our paper. I don't think they're going to do it if we tariff them. And so then who's going to buy it? That's a good question. So I think it's a real problem, but I do think that Trump is going to try and pass an extension of what he's got. So if I was doing tax planning, I would assume that's going to be there. That's my best guess.
Got a couple of questions. One is kind of getting back to the political thing, and the other is very simple. The one deals with the deficit. You use the term deficit, and I think a lot of people are confused about the difference between the deficit and the debt. And I saw the senator the other day had billboard before the crowd kind of drowned them out, I guess. It was like $37 trillion of debt, which is different than the deficit. So I don't know if it would be helpful maybe for you to address the difference.
Well, the deficit is the accumulation over time of the debt. So you have debt every year in your budget deficit, that's the debt for the current year, but it gets added into the total that's been accumulated. And of course the government has to fund that. So they keep issuing, most of the government's paper that they issue, the bonds and the notes, just go to pay off the old ones, because they've issued them before. And so then when those mature, they have to go and get some more. So a lot of what they're doing is just refinancing the paper they've got. It's like refinancing your mortgage. You didn't get any, if you don't get any new money, it's just the same money, but it's just on a new interest rate.
Yeah,
And that's really what happens. The Fed goes out and reissues their paper, but it gets a new interest rate and a new time period.
I plugged in 4%, I just guessed maybe 4% they're paying an average on their debt, their treasury notes, what have you. And I calculated that it was approaching, I think, somewhere between 1 and 2 trillion, if I remember right, annually for just the interest payments that they're having.
Oh, the interest payment, and see, that's the other side of the problem that we're going to be looking at. The interest payments consume about 30 to 35% of the current budget. Just the interest on our debt. So that means we have to fund the entire government out of the other 60-some%. Yeah. And every year that number just keeps getting higher because they keep issuing more and more debt and more paper. So eventually we're going to get the 50% of our budget is interest on the debt, and we've only got 50% left to work with. And so that number keeps shrinking over here, and this number keeps going up. And it's a numbers game that eventually we're all going to be losers. And that's why the deficit does matter. And that's why they keep, most of the Republicans used to want to lower the deficit, and that's why they did. Because they could see that this interest on the debt keeps creeping up and shoving everything else out of the budget. So that's why it's so important to keep that deficit down so the interest doesn't consume a huge part of the budget.
The second question I had deals with IRAs. When you're getting, I'm going to have to start taking the RMD, and I've got lots of IRA CDs, little amounts. Do you have a recommendation on when we're getting to the RMD time when you've got a lot of things to keep track of with regard to those CDs?
Okay, well, first off, I wouldn't be investing in CDs. That's the first thing I would recommend. My brother and I run the investments for the Lineman Foundation. We got about 15 million in investments right now. We do not use CDs at all. Most of our portfolio, of course, we're a long-term horizon organization. So we are looking at, the organization is perpetual. It goes on forever. So we have a very long time horizon. So obviously most of our portfolio is in the stock market because we really don't care if it goes up and down because we're looking at 40, 50 years from now. And like Warren Buffett says, it'll be higher. Don't worry about it. It will be higher. So we invest for the long term, but I would not get into a CD if I could avoid it. Now, there are a lot of alternative investments. I don't know if you've ever heard of a STIFT account. It's a short-term federal investment trust. Union Bank has this account. Okay, I've got most of my short-term money in STIFT accounts. It's paying just under 4%. It's liquid. I can take the money out any day. I can move it around, and I'm getting 4%, no time horizon. There are other vehicles like that. You can buy treasury notes. I buy those as well. Treasury notes pay around 4%. The short ones, 3 to 6 months, are paying 4%. Again, treasury notes are for a fixed time period, 3 months or 6 months, but there's a daily trading market. You can sell it any day you want.
Do you have an IRA?
You can sell it in an IRA, yeah. Yeah.
Can you spell STIFT for us?
STFIT, Short-Term Federal Investment Trust is what that stands for.
Thank you.
And there may be a minimum requirement of how much you have to put in. I don't know, you'd have to check with the bank. But, we deal in bigger numbers, so it's never a problem with us. We're moving the money back and forth, but you should be able to put it in there. But the reason I like it is it's got no time horizon on it, and it pays 4%. Can't beat that. And I can go in today and take out 5,000, and tomorrow I can put 10 in. I can take 15 out the next day, so I can move the money back and forth. So we use it to fund our checking accounts at the foundation. So when I need money, I will pull it out of the STIFT and put it in the checking account. And then if I bring in money from our investment account, I'll put it back into the STIFT.
This is going to be a variable rate, though?
It's a variable rate, and it changes with the Fed. So one of the problems you have with the STIFT, and this is why you have to be somewhat flexible with your investments and how you look at them. When the Fed drove the rates to zero, remember, it's short-term federal investment trust, the rate was 0. So when the Fed drops it to 0, the rate goes to 0. So when that happened, we moved our money to money market accounts because the bank was paying, you know, 1/3%, you know, or maybe half if we were lucky, on the money. So the STIFT was 0, but the money market account was paying something. So we shifted our money into the money market until the Fed pushed the rates back up. Then they pushed them up to 5%, and bingo, the STIFT was paying 5%. So then we shifted all the money back. So you have to move it back and forth. The same way with the treasuries. The treasuries went to 0 basically because the Fed controls the short end. So they pushed it down. And so then you'd have to move to a different investment temporarily while the rate was artificially pushed down by the Fed. Then once it goes back up, then you could shift your money back. But I don't like CDs just because they have withdrawal penalties on them. They have fixed time periods. You can't take the money out. So I just really don't like CDs. They're not my favorite vehicle. You should also look at money funds by Vanguard and these other companies. A lot of them are probably paying 3 to 4% for money funds. And so then again, that's a better place to park the money than in a CD. And CDs are just too illiquid for me.
One more thing about the CDs compared to the money, or compared to the treasuries, bills, notes, bonds, is the taxing.
Mm-hmm.
Because with CDs, I think we get state tax as well.
Right. CDs are going to be taxed at both federal and state. The U.S. bonds and notes are taxed only on the federal, no tax on Nebraska. So that's another reason I like that. The STIFT account is going to be taxed on both. It's going to be taxed on both. But so we have a lot of treasuries because then that money's not taxed. Now you're not going to like this, but the tax rate we pay on our foundation, we could have 20 million of taxable income. Our tax rate is 1.39%.
You're doing good things with it.
We are. We're giving away, and we have to give it away.
Yeah.
We have to give away 5% of our money every year. That's by law. So we give away 5%. When I was doing my seminars as a CPA, we had a person from the IRS come one time. And this was when the Fed had dropped the rate to 0. So I asked the IRS person, I said, what are you going to do to help us out? We have to give 5% of our assets away, and we are earning 0. We'll look into that. That was the answer I got. We'll look into that, because that is a problem. Because we had to sell assets to be able to make the 5%, even though the assets weren't earning 5%. But it was temporary. I mean, it was only a few years, but they did not make any modification in the rule just to help us out while the rates were 0.
Chip, I would ask you to talk a little bit about required minimum distributions, when people have to start, why they have to start, and also how people can use qualified charitable distributions to help themselves and to possibly help their church. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're hosting these presentations, is to get people to think about the importance of your house of worship. Okay, all right. Well, there's your questions up on the screen that you had. It's up on the screen. The 75 was for people that were born after 1960, because they keep pushing the age back. So if you were born after 1960, it's going to be 75. But if you're not, it's 73. But RMDs are the required minimum distribution that comes out of your IRA account
because the IRS, when they passed the Roth IRA, it was the biggest giveaway in the history of the world. It really was. I don't know how Senator Roth got the bill passed. I really don't. Named after him. And I don't know what, there's like 50 or 60 trillion dollars in Roth IRA accounts with zero tax. It was just insane. I don't know why the government allowed such a thing to happen. But it doesn't have an RMD, which means you don't have to take the money out. On a regular IRA, of course, you didn't get a tax benefit for putting it into the Roth. You had to pay tax on the money that went in. But a regular IRA, obviously, you get to shelter that off your tax return through either a 401k, 403b, a regular IRA, a simple IRA, whatever vehicle you're using. And it's sheltered from tax. So then the IRS said, well, we've got to get that money out so we can collect some tax on it. So that's why they came up with the required minimum distribution that said when you get to a certain age, you can't just let it sit there anymore. You got to pull it out. So we want to get tax on it. Then they said, well, we're going to allow qualified charitable distributions to be used to offset that money if you don't want to put it on your tax return. So that's what the QCD is. And that is something that people can use to shelter from their tax return. And I do this, and I'm sure several other people here do the same thing, is that I use the RMD through a QCD. So I give it to charity. I don't want it on my tax return. I have enough other income. I'm still getting payments on the sale of the accounting firm, stuff like that. I don't want any more income. So I'm giving it away. So it doesn't show up on my tax return. And so that you can use to give to any charity. Again, it can't be a private foundation, but it's a public charity. Churches are a good vehicle for that. I give money through my QCD to my church. And so a lot of people are doing that to keep it off of their tax return. Now, if you need the money to live on, you can't do that. But if you don't need the cash to live on, then you can do it.
So we got a couple of examples here.
Yeah. Yeah, the maximum amount is $108,000 that you can take out. They adjust it for inflation. So most people don't do that. They just do their RMD. If they're going to do it, they'll just do, even if you have a 30,000 RMD or something like that, you just do 30,000. But you can do any part of it you want. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can do 5,000, 10,000, however you want. Everything you do through the QCD comes off your tax return. Now it's tricky when you see your tax return if you do it, because the full amount of the IRA distribution is going to be on the inside box on your tax return. And then over here in the taxable column will be the net after the QCDs, and there'll be a little QCD printed on the form right by that box, which says, here's where you started and here's where you ended up, and the difference is the QCD. And so then you have to maintain records of, where the money went. And the money has to go directly to the charity out of the IRA. The money can't go to you and then you give it to the charity. The check has to be in the name of the charity directly. But you can, Vanguard, for example, sends me the checks. I have my money at Vanguard. And personally, I think they're the best investment firm in the country. Most of their mutual funds are less than 0.25%. And most other mutual funds are 1 to 1 1/4.
And expenses.
In expenses, right.
Do you say they send you the checks to you to then mail to the charities?
Yes. They send them to me directly. So I get the check, then I send it on to the charity.
But it's not.
But
No, it's in the name of the charity, right. So it'd be to the name of the church, but then they send it to me because I'm the one that took it out. So they send it to me. Some of these people mail them direct. Because I know some of the other charities, like Fidelity, I think, mails it direct. So they're done differently. But either way, it's got to be to the name of the charity, whether it goes there directly from the IRA or whether it goes to you and you give it to them. It doesn't really make any difference. It has to be in their name. It can't be in your name.
yeah, I just fund my one IRA. I use it to fund a checking account, which then has IRA money in it. And I can write the checks myself. The QCD checks we write ourselves on that IRA checking account, so to speak. And
Do you write them to the name of the charity?
oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yes, oh yes.
Yeah.
But it means you don't have to keep going back to your Schwab or whatever for a particular
you're
one.
you're just being the person cutting the check, but it's still coming out of your IRA.
Absolutely, but
What bank set that up for you?
well, I have Schwab, and they have the check
Yeah.
on.
Vanguard would do the same
Sure.
thing. What you do is you get a liquid cash account
Yeah.
in your brokerage account or your wherever your mutual fund is, and then you have money that gets transferred into that cash account, and then you can write checks off the cash account.
Which means every funeral I go to and write a check to some memorial that they want to give, whether it's the University Foundation
Yeah, and
or
that
the
would
church.
enable you to write
I just write it out.
smaller checks.
Yeah. My question is short-term borrowing. And some people borrow against equity in their house.
Uh-huh.
Talk about that just a little bit and the problems that might cause, but there's also, I'm trying to think of the acronym for it or the commonly used name for it, but it deals with more flexibility and you don't have to take all the money out you have access to. In other words,
You talking about a reverse mortgage?
Well,
or a second mortgage?
well, reverse mortgage.
Okay, the reverse mortgage, there's nothing wrong with that. You're tapping the equity in your house, but you're depleting your estate at the same time because the value of the house is the net of its worth minus the debt. So it started with zero debt, and then as you go through the reverse mortgage, it's pulling up the debt. And they'll only loan you, 70% of the house's value because they don't want to go too high, because then if the house went down in value, they want to make sure they've got a 30% cushion to cover it. But you can pull the money out, so there's nothing wrong with the reverse mortgage. I don't know what the interest rate is on one of those. I don't have an idea of what that is, but
Yeah.
you'd want to look to see what the interest rate was that they were going to charge you on the mortgage.
Yeah, and also when you get the loan, the reverse mortgage, say it's $500,000 and you're taking $300,000 out as a loan.
Well,
That is one way to do it, or you can get it with a cap, with a floating amount that you only pay interest on the amount you've taken out.
yeah, well, anyway, the reverse mortgage is you're just tapping the equity in your home to use for living expenses. That's generally what people do that want those, is that instead of going out and borrowing money, they just tap into the equity that's in their home to start with.
Okay, we're past time. We have time, maybe one more question. Anybody have one more question?
That was good timing. And if anybody wants to come up and ask me more questions, you can. I'll be around for a bit.
Okay, please join me in thanking Jeff for being with us tonight. And I wanted to let you know that our next presentation in this Life and Legacy Planning Series is going to be on May 6th. It's a Tuesday night, same time, same station. Professor Julie Masters will be here. She's a professor of gerontology at UNO and UNL. Julie is, if anybody's ever heard her, she's just hilarious. So she's going to talk about the importance of having a death plan, and you're going to say, well, that doesn't sound so funny to me, but it is important, and Julie will make it humorous when she talks to us about it. She actually teaches a class, so you got 20 and 22-year-olds at the university in Omaha and also Lincoln that are writing a death plan. So they, well, of course, they're going to live forever. They're going to live forever at that point, but please join us if you can. Larry, what's your...
Just an observation, I think we're also encouraging people to bring their children.
Yes.
If you can.
Absolutely. It's important to bring your adult kids to some of these things. And thanks to Nancy's expertise, these sessions are recorded. So you can go out to our website. This won't be out there for a while, but the previous presentations that we've done with the two attorneys in January and with Jane Bryant in February and so forth, they're on our website. So if you have your sister in Timbuktu, or your kids live in Tennessee or whatever, they can go out and watch them anytime. Sit at home in their pajamas and drink coffee or whatever they want to do and watch them anytime. So May 6th is our next presentation. Hopefully we'll get it into the newspaper. Nancy, thanks to her, and also thanks to Stacy's efforts, we have it advertised out in the community and on social media. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight and wish you a wonderful evening.